another PropMoto webinar. As always, I am your host, Franco. I'm the editor and co-founder of PropMoto, and got a really interesting and pertinent conversation today. We'll be talking about office leasing. I think everyone on this call likely knows that there are struggles in the office sector. Although I think, if you read in the newspapers, personally, I think a lot of those struggles are a little overblown. I'm lucky enough to be able to talk to a lot of people in the industry, brokers, owners, and while there certainly are a lot of struggling buildings, I think the office sector is healthy in a lot of ways that I think are overlooked. I think it's a lot more nuanced than a lot of the kind of, I hate to say mainstream media, but a lot of the kind of publications make it out to seem. And so that's some of the stuff we're going to get into, right? Is what exactly is going on in the office leasing environment, which offices are being successful and which are struggling. Obviously, there's a lot of factors to this, right? Location, capital stack. I hear from people that this is the worst time ever. I also hear from people that this is a great time to do some capital improvements because they have vacancy, right? And so that just kind of shows the bookend of thinking about this of what's going to happen. I think we all understand that offices are here to stay. The whole kind of office apocalypse idea that was in the pandemic, I think, was a lot of doom and gloom. And it's changing. Office footprints are shrinking, but plenty of occupiers are still looking to offices to help productivity and creativity and culture and all of those things that kind of the shared workspaces provide. So without further ado, we'll get into this. My guest today is AJ Kapoor. He's CEO of TouchSource. It's a digital directory and signage provider. Hi, AJ.
Hey, Franco. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. This is a great one. So let's just kind of set the baseline here. Let's talk a little bit about kind of the state of the leasing environment right now. I hear, like I said, a lot of, oh my God, there's, everybody is kind of giving up their office. At the same time, I look at buildings like, One Vanderbilt in Midtown, they're fully leased up, right? And so there's obviously some nuance there. So talk to me about what you're hearing from some of your clients about, how these buildings are being leased and what the pipelines are looking like.
Yeah, clearly this is a winners and losers type market. And I think there's hope for optimism. I think it was the W.C. Fields quote, right? The news of my demise has been greatly exaggerated. And I think, the office is facing that as well. There's been some really interesting data that's come out lately, just in the last week, that things like 60% of office vacancies seem to be consolidated with about 10% of properties. And then, legacy properties, those 20 years and older, seem to be getting the brunt of it. And so I think what I'm hearing from clients, from landlords and property management and brokerage teams is, one, if they are in that, either bad location or age or something, what can you do to change your leasing environment? Or if they do have asset or location or a new building, how do they continue to heighten their advantage? I have some partners who are huge waiting lists and just down the street, so location isn't that much different. There's vacancies, and so I think we're going to see this winners and losers market change for a while. But the other thing I think we're going to see is, in just the macro world, whether it's our personal lives or our professional lives, we're revaluing and re-estimating the value of personal contact. And people are returning to public meetings. Travel is back up. Business travel is now back to their, pre-pandemic highs. And I think that's going to continue to shape what an office looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And, before we start getting into some of these ways that the office is kind of evolving, I just want to remind everyone that, this is live. You can ask all the questions you want or make comments in the chat here. If they're pertinent, I will certainly bring them up. And, we're always happy to. I know a lot of you are experts as well. So let us know what you're seeing, and, it would be great to add to the conversation. So let's talk a little bit about, I think what we consider to be Class A office is shifting a little bit, right? I think traditionally this idea of Class A had a lot to do with, lobbies, beautiful adorned lobbies, right? Nice fixtures, all of these things that we kind of associate with high-end offices. But now when I look at, what these Class A plus offices are, which seem to be the ones, like you say, that are doing the best, they don't have the same, they don't necessarily have that, right? And so talk to me about some of the things you're seeing that are kind of commonalities of some of these Class A offices that are doing well.
Yeah, and if you kind of create the spectrum from the Class A to the trophy real estate, call that Class Triple A or whatever new nomenclature we're going to use, I think what's showing up is really matching a set of amenities and designs to the specific tenants they're targeting and looking to attract.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a tech centric environment, it could be very much about activation of common spaces, right? And that can be retail on the ground floor, that could be common amenities, conference rooms, coffee everywhere, things like that, as opposed to a suit and tie professional environment that frankly is still a huge percentage of office occupants are the, your financial advisor, the lawyers, the service
Mm-hmm.
providers, insurance that you come in and see every day. They have a prestige that they want to show. And that doesn't make the activation and the busy lobby with potential, chaos and people with laptops versus the polished look for the lawyer. Those aren't valued better. No, one is not bad or good. They're valued differently by the targets that they're coming in. And so I think property owners have a unique burden now in which they not only have to appeal to a broad set of tenants, but make sure that their amenities and their investments in these new ones that are coming in map to the types of tenants that they're targeting or trying to retain, because it's really in this area of focusing in on what people really want and what they're using rather than broad brush. Here's a beautiful large lobby.
Yeah, exactly. That, one size fits all office is certainly a thing of the past. And I think it adds a little bit of depth to the conversation about the office, right? I remember for a while there was, open offices are the best thing. Like, oh, open offices are terrible, cubicles are ugly. And you just have to remember that like every organization has a different opinion of that, right? Some people love cubicles, right? Some people need the open office. Good luck trying to get a partner at a law firm into an open office, right? They want their corner, prestige office, like you're saying, right? So understanding the value to the occupier is huge, right? And so it also kind of makes the marketing of these properties and the pipeline of these properties a little bit different, right? You can't just kind of spray and pray now. I think there is an aspect of, okay, here is the market we are looking for. Let's carve out a product that we know they're going to like, right? This floor space, the footprint, the amenities, the services, right? And focus on them. So, maybe talk to me about some of the ways that you think that people can, one, better understand their kind of product market fit, and two, how they can actually go out and market to that specific segment and, kind of build a pipeline in that segment.
Yeah, I think that's $1 million or multi-billion-dollar question but in talking to different property owners that we serve, and we appear to our property owners in everywhere from the lobby to the conference room to a shared space. So what's neat is it fosters different conversations on those tenants and their potential occupiers. But one thing I think when we talk about the winners and losers, the winners are doing really well is understanding the way that their target tenants or occupiers want to work and they want to maintain and build their community. And so, we created, for example, a checklist with a tenant that an owner that they were thinking through. And it's like, step one, I want to make a really good impression. Step two, I want to make sure that the place has utility for tenants. Step three, I want to show flexibility, like it's future proof. And then, step four is I want to be able to create a space that can build community. And so but those four steps aren't the same for every prospective tenant. And so or occupier, what we're encouraging people to do is have, if you take a step back, a building is a product like any other product, whether it's like a phone or a coffee mug or whatever, and you've got to do that product match, that what is the job that the product is going to serve for the prospective person that's going to pay for that product. And what we're seeing now is where you have fixed things that can't change, like the shell and the location. We're seeing technology as a way to create a new bridge to functionality that a tenant or a prospective tenant may want, that normally you couldn't get. And so, you know, just an example of that that's popping up now is, you brought up One Vanderbilt, right? You cannot, it's a unique one of a kind view that cascades around that entire building, especially when you go up to the top floor. And that's going to create the impression and the prestige that's there. But if you're sitting not in Midtown Manhattan, but in Midtown Kansas City and trying to recruit people, what is the way that you create that one of a kind impression that creates that signature for the building, even if it's a 50-year-old building? Mm-hmm. And I think what we're seeing is technology is creating that bridge for people that makes it one of a kind while using some common tools and techniques to get there.
Yeah, and I mean it's so almost kind of, you know, anti what you'd think, right? Like, just to build this product that you think everybody might be able to use, you're actually kind of handicapping yourself, because now it doesn't stand out in any way, right? Yeah. It doesn't have that thing that you talked about, kind of consumer products, right? Like, that's, you know, you see this all over, whatever product there is, there's like, okay, well, there's this product for this segment, right? And we're not worried about everybody else that wants it, but like, you know, this actual product for this market. And so that's what I'm hearing and seeing too, right? Is this idea of like, okay, we want a tech, right? This office would be perfect for a tech client, right? This office would be perfect for a law firm. And, you know, I think that there's been a lot of talk about kind of pipelines actually starting to come back, right? Brokers that I talk to say, you know, people are interested. We're doing a lot more tours now. But at the same time, the process from, you know, kind of tour to leasing seems to be longer. Actually, SL Green had their earnings call last week, and that's something that they said, is that they think their pipeline is strong, but you know, they have noted that it has taken a little longer. People want to view more spaces for this very reason, right? They want to find the space that they think is perfect for them. They're not going to view 2 or 3 offices and say, okay, it's the right size, like that should be fine, you know. And so I do think that office owners have to understand a little bit better what their product is, what their local market is, right? And yeah. And who kind of their target market, you know, is in that local market. So, you know, do you have any ideas of how maybe they could use some, you know, some data and technology to be a little bit smarter? I think obviously there's a, you know, your current tenants, you want to keep them more than anything, right? And so there's a piece to that. But I think there's also understanding of, you know, a give and a take between those two, right? You can understand your current tenants, what they like about your space. If they leave, that tells you something about it as well, right? I think there's a lot of learning that can be done. But what do you think as far as like the best practices as far as understanding your market, your target, and your kind of pipeline?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there. One, I think we're all hearing that the opportunity, the top of the pipeline continues to really grow, but it's ending up being this strange shaped pipeline where it's not even a cone. It's just a giant thing standing up at the top of the funnel. And the question is how do you get those people moving down in the funnel? So there's some macro positive things that are coming out. So, you know, the castle occupancy thing is above 50%. And why does that help an individual property owner? Because it's that rising tide. And then you can start to show more activity within your building as well. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of the castle occupancy because it's just a smaller set of data. And so it got us thinking, because they only have a finite set of buildings, but it got us thinking, what other data could a property owner start to use? And, you know, our retail customers and our retail properties use a whole lot of mobile data, whether it's coming from places like Placer or others, to really try to understand the flow of people around there. And for the first time in the last 6 months, I'm hearing of more and more office owners and office brokers using more retail centric type tools to show what the buzz is around this area and demographic. And that's helping move things from the top of the funnel down the funnel, because you can tell a better story, a narrative on, the people live in, you do the common zip code analysis of where the prospective tenant is, but then here are the stores, here are the shops, here's the journey that people will have during the day, here's where they're going to go for lunch, and I have data that shows this is what people are doing and this is where people are going to. So I think that at least from a data set point of view, taking the tools that our friends in retail have been using over the last few years, because we're commercial real estate and office real estate has to embrace almost a retail centric view and a hospitality centric view at the same time and start using some of those tools. Otherwise, in this winners and losers paradigm that we've been talking about, you almost are choosing to be the loser at that point. Like we've got to do something different in order to move these buildings out of the low occupancy, low utilization.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, retail for a long time has been very good about understanding market, right? Understanding synergies. I think that it's important for the office industry to kind of realize that your office is not in a vacuum, right? Like everything around it is important for that market, right? The people look at that, how you get there, what's the parking, how's the public transit, what are the food options nearby, right? All of these things, I think. And that's something, that you say retail's been doing this for a while when it comes to like, tenant mix for a shopping center, right? Knowing that this kind of tenant and this kind of tenant seem to do really well in the same shopping center together, right? I kind of think that there's a similar thing going on with office, and you can kind of say, okay, let's like, critically and honestly look at the market we are, where this office sits, what's around it, and be honest about how we can build something that, adds to that and isn't trying to kind of put a square peg in a round hole, right? If you're in an area that is, with a lot of, or let's say with no local, amenities in retail, you maybe are going to struggle to find particularly occupiers that don't have office mandates, right? Like they're looking for those offices that people want to come to. And again, I think there's an honesty part of this is like, nobody wants to be in the office every second of the day when they come to the office. They want to also go to the coffee shop and they want to also go shopping afterwards or whatever it may be, right? So those local amenities are really important. And, I think from what I've heard too, there's a big shift in thinking about kind of ground floor retail, right? This is actually where the office owner is able to influence this local amenities idea, but that's not so easy, right? Ground floor retail can be very fickle, it can be hard. And yeah, I think connecting the ground floor retail to the tenants in a way is important. So maybe talk to me a little bit about how to think about ground floor retail and how some of your clients are maybe trying to make better decisions with those.
Yeah. And I have a kind of a funny anecdote on this, because you and I were bouncing ideas off of this a few weeks ago when we spoke, and I was talking to a property owner, and he, like me, comes from an Indian heritage. So there's this, whole thing around arranged marriage. And so he said, look, you've got to view retail as not your ground floor retail is not a love marriage, but an arranged marriage. An arranged marriage, everyone goes into it knowing that, oh my God, this is going to take a lot of work to be successful, because I don't, there's not love at first sight. There's not. And I kind of like that story, because if you bring in retail and you're just, yes, it's love at first sight, this store is just going to, or this coffee, or this is just going to take off, you're probably destined to fail. And there's nothing worse to attract new tenants that have a vacant retail space on your lobby. So I would strongly encourage any owner to think about how every week, every month, how do I support my retailers on the ground floor? Because it's a very symbiotic relationship with all the tenants. So that could mean, if it's a small little deli, making sure every floor along the way gets some visibility to the weekly specials. If there's discounts on the dry cleaner, making sure that that's all visible. The more, the curse of ground floor retail is also its beauty, and that most of its purchases are from people in the building, but you're also closed from there. So as an owner or a landlord, you almost have an accountability to make sure that that ground floor retail can blossom and grow and becomes part of the daily habits of the tenants, because that's going to help you get the next tenant and the next tenant. Because if they see a bustling deli or coffee shop in the lobby, now you get back to that word activation that everyone's going to, and a space is active and it's alive, and that's attractive to a tech tenant, a lawyer, banker, whoever is looking for that energy as well. So yeah, it needs a lot of consistent work. It's not expensive work. It's just conscious work, making sure there's visibility, accessibility, and availability of what those retailers are going to provide.
Yeah, and retail landlords are so good at this, right? Like they check in. I mean, a lot of them have sales data from their tenants, or even get paid based on sales. So, I've heard of retail landlords, making sure that to help boost Google reviews for their clients, right? To make sure that there is some sort of cross traffic, right? Promote one retailer here to there, and I think that's kind of an approach that office landlords need, not only for the connection between their ground floor retail and their offices, but kind of between offices as well, too, right? I think I've heard more and more that it's not about just collaboration, like inter-team collaboration. It's also, or intra-team collaboration, I say. It's also about bringing people in from outside, right? People like to randomly meet someone that is on another floor, right? That might be in a business that is adjacent to theirs, right? Something like that. And so I think ground floor retail can do a lot for that, right? Those kind of ground floor coffee shops, you can meet people. What do you think that landlords can do to try to kind of build that connection between tenants?
Yeah, it's a great idea. And actually, if you look at, going back to the original variation of the Regus concept to, WeWork and the kind of modern co-working, a lot of their model was built on these conscious collisions of people, like having different people in the industry running into each other. And it's excited tenants. That's what prior to the economic model of co-working, just the collaboration model really drove a lot of that. So I think we're seeing a couple of things. One is landlords are getting creative on shared amenities. So I actually met with a property owner in New Jersey, and their building is probably 75% lawyers, but they were having trouble getting that last piece, which were smaller footprint suites. And when they talk to people and understand what's holding them back, it was, well, I won't have space for my law library. And so this brilliant landlord said, well, what if the law library was a shared amenity in this space? It's like, that's really thinking differently into, we think of a shared amenity as a coffee shop, but for lawyers, it's that trove of hundreds of law books that sometimes you need to just go and sit and look at. And so I think, again, it gets back to that focused pursuit of some of the specific occupiers or tenants, whether, if you're building a creative oriented building that has everyone from architects to draftsmen to designers to creatives, then collaborative creative space as a shared amenity, not a conference room, but draftsman tables and different lighting and different seating, may be what it may have been a dead area in the back of your lobby, but could suddenly activate into a different space. And so I think this purpose-driven amenities based on the tenant mix, starts to really become interesting. And like anything else, like we talked about with ground floor retail and everything, you got to promote it. You got to make sure it's easy to book. You got to make sure it's flexible. It's designed. But there's a huge opportunity in kind of re-examining what is a shared amenity based on very, very focused, targeted pursuit of tenants. Yeah. Oh, Franco, I think your mute came on.
Thank you. I had a plane flying overhead. Yeah, that's a great example. The law firm that kind of thinking outside, or the landlord is thinking outside the box. And I think these shared amenities also can create these collisions, right? I hear a lot about, gyms generally sit empty, but when you put some programming, right, you have spin classes, you have yoga, all of a sudden, you can bring people together, right? All of a sudden your usage of the gym goes way up, right? Because you're bringing people in for a reason. And so those are all things that isn't easy, right? Like you say, it's not expensive, but it does take time and energy and thinking. I mean, are you seeing office landlords that kind of have someone that this is their, this is what they do? Like before, I think it used to be the person at the front desk was just a security officer, right? And I'm kind of seeing that changing into this, like you say, that kind of more of a hospitality. So how are offices actually changing to kind of have this personnel to be able to do these kind of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is maybe old news, but we've seen the big change in the terminology of how some of the teams are managing, and there's always a property manager who's really managing the building, but now we're seeing the rise of the community manager, and their role is to enable the people that occupy the building. So what their job is if you do have a gym amenity, are people using it? Why aren't they using it? Are the schedules visible? Are they part of their normal flow? I had a wonderful experience being able to walk a tenant journey with a community manager. And so we literally pulled into a tenant reserve parking spot, how they navigate their way into the building, how they, and all those pieces. And how one of the big questions the community manager was asking is, I want to share more and use that tenant journey to be able to excite them about their community, whether it's a little thing like a happy hour or activating ground floor retail or showing some shared services or getting their feedback. How do we hit all those points on the tenant journey? And, we're seeing a, probably no secret as well, blowback to the rapid expansion of apps and everything on people's phones, and everyone's muting it and stuff. So they're struggling to get insights, these community managers. And so part of the question for the community managers is, how in everyday paths and conversations and journey walking can you understand what that tenant is experiencing, and then change the journey in some ways, get them to stop and have coffee, drive that collision, and do that. And so these community managers are taken from different disciplines. I talked to some community managers that came from more of a marketing discipline, and they were trained in like persona marketing, and they're trying to identify the different personas, or people coming from property management, or people coming from the brokerage side that are now looking at a kind of a different type of role change. But this role, I think, is going to continue to grow, and it's going to be it's my prediction is it's going to turn into a discipline, with certifications and credentials and training, and potentially even a college path to it, because that's essentially what these offices in the future are building, is how do you build that community, and the community manager becomes a huge part of it.
Yeah, I mean, going back to our pipeline conversation, I think it's important to understand too that these people aren't just there to make your current tenants happy. Obviously, that's a big part of their job, but you can't just look at them as an expense like that, because I do think, much like a consumer product, right? You have your kind of client success managers that can weigh in on your marketing. And that's what I'm hearing too, is like, yes, as much as I like to evangelize technology, data can tell you a lot, but it doesn't give you the whole story, right? You need to have that kind of qualitative understanding of who your clients are, what they like, what they don't like, right? To really, and the only way to do that is to interface with them. And so these community managers, I think, can be a very valuable insight into how to position your product, right? Who your possible market is. And I think that they can add a lot to an office beyond just, okay, you want to have someone that's going to schedule some ice cream socials or something.
Yeah. I think one other thing, and you got me thinking about, is what we encourage our clients to do is make sure the story of your property is easy to tell and very visible. And so, that may look like, when a visitor comes into the building, they're not only getting navigation, but they're hearing the story of the property, because And I read this actually in a Prop Moto piece recently, like view every visitor as a prospective future tenant. And so that storytelling becomes important. And so that these community managers are the ones who can tell the story and the narrative of the property better than anyone else. And that's a litmus test of their effectiveness and your effectiveness as a property in building that community. And I know it's in some cases a luxury that not like smaller buildings won't be able to afford and things like that. But if you incorporate it into an aspect of people's role, if you think about it as an operator or a property manager or an owner or a broker, and you include this sort of thinking, I think only good ideas come from it.
Mm-hmm. So let's drill a little deeper into this idea of, what kind of our current occupiers want. And obviously, we're not going to paint with a broad brush. We can kind of pick it apart a little bit. But, you hit on four, I think, pretty general topics earlier that are pertinent. So, let's go back through it. I think your first one had something to do with kind of that first impression, right? That like, what's that feeling, and when you talk about art, right, it's not about the actual picture, it's about the feeling that it gives you. And I kind of feel like that about offices, buildings, and architecture in a way too, right? Like you get a feeling when you first walk in. And as much as I say, hey, lobbies don't count, I think this is a case where it does, right? You walk into a beautiful lobby with flowers and big famous artist piece of work there. Like it sets the tone for the rest of your walk. But what are other ways that, obviously not everybody can have that marble lined lobby and the giant pieces of art. So what are some other ways that you think offices could do a little bit better of setting that impression?
Yeah. And that impression in any property, I mean, we've all gone on home tours or things like that when you're looking, and that a realtor in a private single family home will spend most of the time on that opening impression. Here's the curb appeal all the way through. They bake the chocolate chip cookies, so you get the smell when you walk in the door. And that first impression, the first impression and the last impression are the things that linger the most. And so obviously if locations are blessed with a wonderful location and they have this natural light, or the building was built focusing in on that impression, you already have that. But fortunately, most buildings that are working through their occupancy challenges don't have that. And so I think there's a few things. Is one, you got to think beyond the history of the building, like the 1960s and 1970s and then the early 1980s buildings are the ones suffering right now. And so without a major investment in construction, right, which we all know has its issues right now, how do you create a different impression? And it can be, again, borrowing from the world of hospitality. We've seen people change check-in desks in hotels, high-end hotels, to small little podiums, and then the rest is an active space of people hanging out and collaborating and stuff. So I've seen office properties adopt that. We worked with a property that was just had no traffic, no life, and said, well, what if every day there was a new art experience? And what if people paused to observe the art, read about the artist? And so we created something where every day, literally, there's a new piece of local art that shows up on the wall. And technology doesn't always solve those things, but what it does for an impression is sometimes your impression gets stale over time. And that piece of art that you spent a tremendous amount of money for got out of style a year later or 2 years later, everyone's tired of seeing it. And so what the advantage of using things like digital canvases start to really create that flexibility. And we're seeing them everywhere on our social media feeds and others. And that creates a little bit of buzz on that first impression in kind of a cool way. And so I don't want to lean into technology for technology's sake, but when you can't change the location and you can't change the shell of the building, how do you create a different impression every day? There's a lot of tools to do that.
Yeah, it goes back to our earlier point where it's not all about spending a lot of money, right? Sometimes it is about just having to constantly spend the energy to understand what people want, change things up. You're right. Like, no matter how great your art is, after a few years, people don't notice it anymore, right? And so something like that. I think there's also kind of a personal touch to this. I know in the Rockefeller Center, for example, they have greeters in the mornings and evenings that'll say
Mhm.
hi and say bye, right? It's a small expense, but I think something that really, really sets it apart to actually walk in and have someone, oh, good morning, it's good to see you again, right? Open the turn, push the turnstile for you, whatever you want. And I think that also has the second effect of being really useful for visitors, right? I think the
Mhm.
visitor experience in a lot of offices is generally not that hospitable, right?
Mhm.
You don't really know where to go. You don't, the security's kind of eyeing you, and so having someone walk up and coming, like you say, just sitting behind the desk and waiting for them to come up is maybe not the right thing to do. That's not what they do in restaurants. They have
Right.
someone right there that greets you. And so I do think there's an element that, just kind of placemaking creativity that can come into that.
Mhm.
Obviously, past the first impression, the kind of, I'd say, the biggest piece of what at least the real estate head of real estate of these places, or the corporate occupier head of facilities, wants is utility, right? They're looking at productivity. They're looking at, how is it affecting our bottom line? How is it affecting our, tenant acquisition, right? And so what are some of the ways that you think the actual building of the office can help the occupiers do that?
Yeah, and part of this goes back to what you were raising earlier, where you fit the target based on the profile of the prospective tenant, why by industry, or like you were saying, like an open floor plan versus office and things like that. So there's a bit of design aspect to be able to hit that element of utility. But then there's a bit of like purposeful creation of the space. And that we tend to really emphasize that moment of the space when they open their suite door and that's their space. But like we were talking about a few minutes ago, right? Those conscious collisions that happen on the way to the elevators or the elevators to the suite and things like that, those have utility, the shared amenities and conference rooms and meeting spaces. When you combine things like impression and utility together, and you can offer a tenant an executive conference room type experience for their high-end tenant acquisition. If you're in banking or things like that, and your footprint is small to where you can't command that 12 table, two chairs at the end, king making conference room, but the building has that amenity, that really starts to hit those utility check marks. There's often a lot of the current bottom of the funnel prospects that are actually closing or very close to closing are not new spaces or large expansions. It's people moving from a space that didn't hit their utility requirements to before. But in order to get them from that bottom of the funnel to close, the brokers and the buildings need to understand what's holding them back, and are there ways to include that in the utility of the building. And so whether it was that law library example that's holding some of the tenants back, it may be a conference room, it may be a proximity to a food amenity or something like that can be solved with a DoorDash solution and stuff. But understanding that last, there's a bell curve on utility, and there's the middle of the stuff we talk about all the time, but those edges, those edge cases are what tends to hold people back to signing the lease. And that last piece of utility is often the last piece that'll get people over the line. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hear from owners and brokers too that you can't just rely on them to know the utility, right? I think
Yeah.
you do have to put it in front of their face, right? And it's easier to do now than ever, right? We have, the occupancy sensors that you can literally say, here's the kind of spaces that are getting used the most, right? By which team, if you want to get that granular. You can also, with all of the kind of, the programming and the apps that are available, you can kind of say, here's how many engagements you had, right? Here's how many message board posts were read, right? I think those kind of things can help occupiers, right? Because they are also, I think it's foolish to think that they know exactly what they would want, right? I think you do sometimes have to kind of show them the value of an office, and instead of just letting them, figure it out themselves. So, what have you heard about the way that, owners and brokers do, right? They're a huge part of this, are, I'd say maybe partnering a little bit more with occupiers to help them, understand their office and maybe even better utilize it.
Yeah. Corporate real estate professionals always struggle with that CEO meeting where everyone's reporting out their metrics. And then the corporate real estate person has, some hard numbers in terms of energy and power and footprint and costs, but never has any hard numbers on the other side of the ledger, right? How they're improving it. And so I think this data around occupancy sensors or touchscreen analytics or message board activations or visitor guest check-ins and things like that can be there. There's been a really interesting set of discussion as people have done return to work mandates on trying to measure productivity for different sites that had higher space utilization. And Microsoft has done some really, really good work in this area, but you do see that productivity enhancement, and it comes in their workforce applications, but you correlate it with the occupancy sensors. You can correlate it with some of the retail mobile analytics that we talked about before and things like that. But ultimately, these can have bottom line impacts. And so as an owner of or a landlord of a building, you have an opportunity to, one, visualize the space. And so whether that's with technology, like augmented reality technology and stuff like that with the architect to show the visualization of the space, or do it in just a data point of view, saying, hey, a tenant in the floor below you has 100 people coming in every day. Here's how they're using the space, what we're seeing from the sensors, all sorts of stuff. That becomes pretty convincing to that corporate real estate guy or lady who's trying to figure out how to communicate the message back to the CEO. The last thing, and you'll kind of hear this theme from me, is it's always important to ask that real estate person the number one question, which is, a year from now, how will you measure the success of taking over this property from a utility point of view? And as a landlord or a broker, if you can align your metrics or any metrics you have with their future metrics, you've got a value connection right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, and I've heard a huge skew about what people do value, right? I think they understand too that it's very hard, even if you have some numbers, it's very hard to track exactly what an office adds to a business. I interviewed a head of real estate at a large occupier, and he said his metric was market share. It's like, look, if we're doing well, if our company's doing well, it's doing something right? I don't need to sit there and pick out, okay, how many hours, how many seconds are people at their desk? It's working, right? So I'm not going, like, if our market share starts to go down, then yes, I'm going to start to look at how we can improve it, and kind of open my mind of how, I think people understand that it's very, very hard. That I don't think we're ever going to have a hard metric of like, here is the utility of your office, right? Because the new value of an office isn't productivity, right? We're not looking at emails sent or, keys clicked or any of that stuff, right?
Right.
And how do you measure how valuable was that collision? I don't know. Maybe a year from now, him and I will be on a team together, right? So something like that, I think, is really valuable. And you make a good point, right? Is like, understand your product and understand your market, understand what they are looking for, and try to help nurture that. I think is super valuable. So another piece that you talked about, and there's a lot to unpack in it, is this idea of flexibility, right? And I think you're right. Right now, particularly, a lot of occupiers are downsizing, but with the hope to get it back to where it is, right? And so it's hard sometimes to pick a very kind of small office if you think that you're going to have to grow, right? Likewise, you don't want to pay for a huge one if you're not sure. So, with a very rigid product like an office is, right? These are long-term leases, these are fixed spaces. How do you think offices can add a little bit of flexibility to help their occupiers?
Yeah. Well, one thing I'm really excited about is many owners, multi-property owners especially, have created and launched their own kind of flex work space environment. And so to those prospective tenants that are unsure of the market, they have a flex product. And it's not just a flex, traditional, here's a cube or a desk or a conference room, but there's flex in the medical office space where you get full built out suites. There's flex designed for, different professions, like there's flex for tech, there's flex for insurance, there's flex for, all those types of things. So they're building in the purpose-built environment with flexibility. But then within your shell already, the office that you're occupying, I think a building owner can show elements of flexibility. And one is, purposeful design, obviously, right? Like we talked about with showing the different possibilities of the space, obviously things like a TI budget to be able to do those types of things. We're seeing shorter leasing terms come into that. And then, coming back to the tech theme conversation, a tech ready environment in terms of kind of bookable spaces, shared amenities, dynamic setup of spaces, being able to expand or contract your space based on a need or an event or a tenant and things like that, and the tech already showing up prior to a prospective tenant coming in there, shows that flexibility and starts having the tenant. And remember, usually in a final, as a corporate real estate person comes in, when you get down to the bottom of the funnel, you bring in a few product GMs or leaders of the business to walk the
HR
spaces.
sometimes.
Yeah, HR and all those, and there has to be, especially in this environment, people have to be able to see a future of this space, not just today, but 2 years, 3 years. It's got to align with their product roadmap and their vision for their company and things like that. And for better or worse, tech creates that flexibility because people see the future and what's there as well.
Yeah, I mean, we started using instead of co-working, we started using the term flex office a lot more, because after we started doing some research and interviewing people, we realized like it's not just the bookends, right? It's not the 5 to 10 year large footprint lease and then the monthly pay as you go, one person gets a hot desk, right? There's a lot in the middle. I remember I interviewed the head of Boston Properties kind of flex office space, and he was looking at things way different. He said, we want to really understand how we can help our tenants. We want to give them a space that they can, he called it kind of a shock absorber, right? If people all of a sudden have another team they need to bring in, or need to downsize and shrink into just what he called like a flex suite, they could, right? And so he looked at actual suites that they could build out. They could do some TIs to it, make it feel like theirs. He said he wanted to shrink the lease actual paperwork till about 6 pages, right? Because if you only have a team of 10 people that's going to rent for 3 months, you don't want to have to pay lawyers to go through 300-page lease documents, right? So stuff like that I think is really important to think about. This idea of flexibility is not necessarily co-working, but this kind of an in-between, right? In between the traditional office lease and this kind of an easy go, pay as you go kind of a thing. I mean, have you seen more and more landlords starting to put in like a flex suite or a flex office space?
Oh, I think there's flex everything now, and it's great and it's exciting because it's not just obviously at the office suite, being able to shorten lease terms, shorten lease complexity, and then provide for ratcheting up or ratcheting down space. Takes the elements of what was kind of co-working, but it really gets it more purposeful for those types of use cases. But then expanding it even to that ground floor retail, creating more flexibility for the retailers. So you're bringing, I had a really, really future thinking partner, owned a bunch of retail in Denver, Arizona, and Seattle, said, I've got ground floor retail, but when the food truck pulls up, the food is worse, but there's a line out front,
New.
And he tried to figure out the phenomena. And the fact is, it's because it's a different food truck every day. And so, he brought in the concept of the pop-up retail, daily switching, literally different vendors bringing the food truck from outside to inside, and his lobbies suddenly start to become really active. So this flex everything, right, becomes not just in the office, but in the retail. You see it in the fitness centers with bringing in kind of these guest trainers and stuff like that. Like, we got used to that as part of our pandemic lives, that we could pick and choose and kind of a la carte our days and our work environment and stuff like that. And I think this a la carte work is applying to offices in a whole new exciting way. And that, by the way, is independent of the age of your building and the location and stuff like that. Like, these are things that 40% of buildings that are struggling with vacancy can operationalize today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, as much as, brokers often don't love the idea of, a smaller long-term lease with a sidecar, co-working space, I do think it's a really, really important way, not only for buildings to, entice tenants that they might not have gotten any other way, but to actually build a brand. I've seen, it's amazing. You're talking about the office as a product. I mean, except for maybe a couple of related, right? Durst in New York, right? There's very few offices that have been able to carve a brand out for themselves, but I'm starting to see more and more try and actually be successful. And I think not only is it have to do with the recognition of, I'm going to get this level of service at this office, but there's also a flexibility that comes with, okay, you can go to any one of our buildings in town or in the world, right? Like, that's the kind of flexibility I think that a larger office owner can roll out that it's hard to compete with. Right now, you're not just competing on a building by building level. You are creating this package that is more than the sum of its parts, right? Do you see that more and more kind of larger owners are starting to have this interconnectivity between locations?
Oh yeah, especially as you get into kind of the expanding South and the West Coast, you see that a lot. I mean, the Irvine company in Southern California has done a tremendous job of bringing that kind of brand standard and then the flexibility in it. Based out of Texas, Granite Properties, a smaller regional one, but they have a signature brand, they have flexibility, they have very high-end amenities, and people have that agility. And as you make your way into places like Atlanta, I saw it in Miami, I was down there recently, and other places. I think as you move out of the high dense worlds of sort of New York and Chicago and the skyscraper, and you're competing at a more suburban level, that flexibility of being able to work in different parts and different locations of a city. I mean, to get across LA could be a 90-minute drive to get to your office, but if your property owner has another building that you can office out of, the value of that is tremendous. And so these Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, LA, these Orlando are starting to really invest in understanding where people live, how they work in different parts of the metro areas, and how their brand can create that consistent flexibility for it. And the one thing that's in the backdrop to everything you and I are saying, Franco, is there's going to be investments, or you're going to pay them out in rent concessions. And we're seeing concessions drop right now in the latest piece. But I think that's because landlords are investing in this. So this flexibility, I know a lot of people are listening. It's like, oh, that's cost. It's going to, but you're going to pay it anyway in a concession.
Yeah.
Or you're going to have to pay it in a concession.
Vacancy.
Yeah. Or a vacancy. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is having implications in the technology world too. We're hearing more and more technology companies that are white labeling stuff, right? Where landlords are like, hey, this app is one of the important touch points that we have with our clients. Like, we want their name on that. We want everything to be us. And I think that's really kind of a change of mindset, right? Like I said, I think there were a few historically, maybe in kind of big metros, but in general, I think more landlords are thinking about the power of branding than ever before, which I think is good. Right? I think it's something that will only kind of push the industry forward, because as you have a brand, now you have to kind of keep up that brand, right? You can't just rely on, your building and, where it is and, the gym or whatever. So.
Oh yeah. And us providing, digital directory and digital signage. I can't tell you how many brand standards we're maintaining now for clients where, ABC property company is going to have this look and feel, this color palette,
These
this
colors.
tenant experience. We're going to refer to our tenants this way as opposed to this way and things like that. It's, I encourage it. I mean, I think it brings that element of hospitality. Four Seasons always has a certain brand standard associated with it. And to the extent our property partners can incorporate that is great.
Yeah. Well, you brought up a fourth point that I want to hit on before we let everybody go. And it's kind of, I'd say maybe the fuzziest, right? The hardest to kind of understand in this idea of like inspiration, right? How do you create a property that people actually want to go to? Obviously, this is so huge in a hybrid world. And I mean, really honestly, pretty difficult. Like if you take, a pretty, uninspiring Class B suburban office property, that's a hard task, right? But talk to me about some creative ways that you see clients actually being able to do this, right? Like make a property inspiring and make a property somewhere that you want to go, commute
Yeah,
to.
yeah. And so if you aren't blessed with location or, a remarkable skyscraper with these billion-dollar views, you have to be highly creative. And again, I like to take from a couple of different industries. So in retail, like here in the Colorado market, a retail center took an old airport or airplane parts factory and converted it to one of the hottest retail spaces we have here. They did not have a lot to work with, but art and experience and customization and stuff created. And now the top floor is all office, like the second floor and this stuff. And so building on kind of what you have, they recognize the space they have and then created that purposeful piece. The thing that I think what we're seeing is those that are choosing to move from the low vacancy to the high vacancy or wanting a vet are taking more risks with a space. No one, again, and you brought this at the beginning, right? The bland sort of generalization of marketing of a building, like this can fit everyone, is actually not fitting anyone. And so I think inspiration comes from choices being made. And they've got to make a choice on, okay, we have a 1975 era lobby, but we're going to lead in with creative modern art, or we're going to create a natural vibe, or we're going to do something like this, but the all of above doesn't necessarily work. And so if you do like what you described, have a greeter coming in and they're polished and they're professional, it's in a white glove service, that you're making a decision and a choice for the building all the way through. And so I think that inspiration goes back to the first point of that opening presence, but it also says you need to define what is and where the inspiration is going to come from. And is it going to come from that community because you have an active space and the inspiration is there's 30 people in the lobby all brainstorming? Or is it from the white glove concierge-like experience? Or is it from bold and daring video wall art experience? Or all, and I don't think all of the above is the right answer to it. I think it's about making choices and being daring with some of these properties that are struggling and choosing not to be in the losers column and moving yourself in the winners column with a big bet.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I, hate to see all the struggles in the office industry, I do think that hopefully it will push people, right, to be more creative, be bolder, and I think offices are going to be better after all of this. So I think it's a great place to end it. I just want to thank everybody for joining. It's been really fun for me. Hopefully you found it insightful. If you have any follow-up questions, I'd be happy to answer them. It's my email is franco@propmoto.com. AJ, thanks a lot for joining us, and see everybody next time.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a good day.